All right, so sorry about that. Um, on to the third line of defense. Um, this would be the specific immune response, and it involves antibodies. So you may have heard of antibodies before. Basically, what antibodies are proteins. They usually have this Y shape right here, and they have these really specific sites on the end of them, and each antibody has a different binding site that's highly specific to whatever it's trying to attach to. So we have antibodies that indicate what type of blood we have. So if you're like type A blood, type B blood, you have different antibodies that would um, react if you got the wrong type of blood transfusion. Um, but they also get made in response to some sort of invasion of our body. Viral invasions typically produce antibodies. And each, like I said, each antibody binds only to one specific binding site known as an antigen. So in one of the videos that I linked on this PowerPoint, they talked about antigens and how these pathogens that we talk about, these foreign invaders, whether they're bacteria or viruses, they have antigens on them. And those antigens are how our body recognizes them. So if you are 2 years old and you start daycare, all right, sorry. If you're a 2-year-old and you start daycare, you get sick all the time. Every little thing that comes by, you catch, you get a fever, you get a runny nose, your body has a huge response to it. But if you've been in daycare for about 4 years, by the time you're 6, you have a really good immune system. That's all due to antibodies. So every time your body catches a cold, it creates antibodies that will detect that cold and fight it a lot faster the next time. So that's sort of how antibodies work. And this is our third line of defense. Oops. So antibody production. Basically what happens is white blood cells gobble up the invading particle, break them down. And when they break them down, they take those little antigens from that foreign particle and they show them to the T cells that we talked about. The T cells are the ones that go around basically eliminating the cells that were attacked and all the other foreign cells in the body. They're like the natural killer cells. The white blood cells gobble up these particles and then they show the T cells these antigens. Those T cells identify the pieces and find specific B cells to help. So I know it's a lot of terminology. The B cells are the ones that produce antibodies. And these antibodies are then equipped to find that specific piece on a new particle and attach to it. So in summary, white blood cell detects the antigen from whatever foreign particle it just gobbled up, shows it to the T cells show it to the B cells produce an antibody, and that antibody can now go out and find the other ones of the same type and kill them. And if the body kills that virus and then gets infected again the next year, it already has these antibodies that recognize that virus right away and are able to fight it right away. So you don't have to go through the whole white blood cell gobbling it up, finding the antigen, showing the T cell, showing the B cell, producing the antibodies. It's a much quicker reaction to the infection. So antibody production is super helpful long term. And we call this immunity. So new particles take longer to identify. So the problem with coronavirus, COVID-19, the reason children aren't really getting infected as much is because we get coronaviruses all the time. Coronaviruses aren't new. This is just a new strain of it. And children who are in daycare and spreading germs a lot and sick all the time have actually a very good immunity to coronaviruses. So they seem to be able to fight this a lot better than adults who maybe haven't been exposed to the coronavirus in a long time, their antibody production has gone way down, they're not fighting it as well. So that's one hypothesis for why kids aren't really catching it as much. So new particles that our body doesn't recognize take longer to identify. Person remains ill until that antibody can be crafted. And then once that antibody is crafted, then the body fights it really quickly. Old particles, so things that we've been infected with before, that we've built up antibodies to, are quickly recognized and either doesn't make the individual sick or allows that person to fight the infection much faster. And now this person is considered immune to that virus. So this shows you, so these are like lymphocytes, are T cells, B cells, T helper cells, memory cells, and then these are all different types of white blood cells over here. You don't need to know all these terms, but these are basically a bunch of the different types of cells that help with our immune system. And this shows you how antibodies help. So first time you get infected, you have 0 antibodies. This is the number of days. So antibody concentration, so you're exposed to the antigen, your increase in antibodies over the next several days go up, and then your body sort of remembers these antibodies, and then let's say you're infected again, the number of antibodies increase significantly from there because you've already found that cell, you've already found that antigen, you're able to mass produce that antibody a lot quicker if you're exposed more than once. All right, so what is immunity? It's when your body's resistance to a disease-causing organism or harmful substance. Basically, when you have enough antibodies to avoid getting sick if you're infected. 2 types of immunity we're going to talk about: active immunity and passive immunity. Active immunity is basically when your body produces the antibodies. So it can happen 2 ways. Either you get sick and your body produces antibodies. So exposure to the actual disease. Let's say you catch the flu this year and your body, you get really sick, you get really tired, it takes a really long time to recover. You feel terrible, but now your body has antibodies to that flu. If you were to catch it again a second time in the same year, you'll probably be much less sick. It won't take as long for you to feel better because you've already built up that immunity. Now, the problem with the flu is it mutates each year. So each year when you catch the flu, it's not the same antibodies you need from the year before. The other way your body can produce antibodies is by a planned exposure to a form of the antigen that's been killed or weakened. Your body detects it, eliminates it, and remembers it. So can you think of what that might be? A planned exposure to a form of an antigen. Give you a second to think about it. It's a vaccine. So what vaccines are planned exposures. So we deliberately expose an individual to some sort of pathogen that's either been killed, so it's not going to actually cause disease, or it's been weakened enough to not actually cause disease, but your body still launches an immune response and produces these antibodies so that if you do come in contact with that specific pathogen, your body already has a really good defense system built up to fight it. And vaccines have been super helpful in eradicating lots of diseases from Earth. Smallpox and polio. There's been measles outbreaks lately, but before, when, right now there's a big push towards anti-vaccine, which I don't support. But before that, we had almost eliminated measles and mumps and rubella and smallpox, polio, all these things that used to kill people all the time. We've eliminated. So vaccines are incredibly helpful in eliminating diseases. So how long does active immunity last? It depends on the antigen. The flu, like I talked about, you need to get vaccinated every single year, oftentimes because the body doesn't recognize it from years past because it mutates each year and it changes. So you need a new vaccine every year. Sometimes you can get a booster shot. So if you get vaccinated as a child and then you get a booster shot as an adult, your body sort of recognizes or remembers the antigen and produces the antibodies pretty quickly. Some vaccines, like chickenpox, for example, last a lifetime. You get vaccinated one time and those antibodies last in your system forever. So some people say, well, I'm not going to get the flu shot. It makes me sick, or I'm not going to get the flu shot because I'll just get the flu if I get it. No big deal. The flu can actually be a really big deal. There are a lot of different strains of the flu, and you might have heard a lot about the Spanish flu, or the Spanish flu of 1918 recently, because people are sort of comparing it to the coronavirus. This was a really deadly strain of the flu that spread across the globe. This was the last pandemic really that we saw, and killed a lot of people. Lots of people are saying that coronavirus is similar to it. It is similar, but there are also a lot of differences. When the 1918 flu happened, we didn't really even understand that the flu was a virus. We didn't understand sanitation techniques. It was in the middle of World War I, so there was a lot of troops sort of moving around, which helped with the spread. So we understand a lot, and medical advances have increased a lot since then. So hopefully we'll be better at stopping the pandemic this time. But flu vaccines are important for reasons like this. The Spanish flu infected 20% of the human population, killed 5%, which came out to be about 100 million people. So that was not good. All right, do we get all the vaccines we possibly can? Well, the Center for Disease Control recommends a lot of these. Some people are choosing not to get them, but you can see if you get the diphtheria vaccine, there's a 100% reduction in cases, nearly 100% reduction in cases for each of these vaccines. So it shows you how incredibly effective vaccines are at reducing the spread of disease. So those are all active immunity, when your body actually produces the antibody. Passive immunity is when you don't produce the antibodies, but you receive the antibodies. Typically, passive immunity happens with newborn babies who are nursing. The mother will actually pass on the immunities that she's making inside her body to her baby during pregnancy through the placenta, or after birth through breast milk. You can also pass antibodies. And these antibodies will protect the baby for a small amount of time following birth until that baby's able to get their vaccines at about 3 months. And they basically last until those antibodies die. But because the baby's not making their own antibodies yet, because they haven't been exposed, hopefully, to those pathogens, they have to wait until they can get their vaccines in order to be immune once those antibodies die. All right, just really quickly, a couple immune disorders. Some of you might have allergies. Basically, allergies are an immune response from your body that occur when your body doesn't understand that dust or pollen or mold or grass or dander, whatever you're allergic to, isn't actually harmful. So your body still launches this immune response. It causes sneezing, runny nose, watery eyes. And you can block it by taking antihistamines. So remember, histamines were the things that our cells released to rush blood to the surface and launch that attack. If you take antihistamines, that should bring some relief, because what's causing this immune response isn't actually dangerous. So we don't actually need the immune response. AIDS is a syndrome. It stands for Acquired Immune Deficiency Syndrome. And this is a syndrome that develops in response to HIV. So HIV is a virus. It's human immunodeficiency virus. This is a virus like coronavirus or the influenza virus. It's a virus that attacks the body, but it's super dangerous because it targets and kills those T cells. So those are those natural killer cells. This virus specifically targets those natural killer cells. And therefore it basically hampers the immune response. So our body's immune response can't happen. And that's when AIDS develops. So basically you have a deficient immune system in response to this HIV. So HIV is the virus. It attacks the body, it kills the T cells, and those T cells now aren't able to fight off all the other little infections that you get. So AIDS is typically what kills somebody because they're not able to fight off a small cold that a normal, healthy human would be able to fight off. The HIV virus isn't what actually kills you. It just cripples your immune system. With the immune system shut down, other pathogens can get in, other diseases can occur, and they can now be life-threatening because you don't have that second line of defense ready to fight them. All right, so we are going to do an activity on Ebola. You might have heard of the Ebola outbreak that happened several years ago in Africa. It was one of the more recent epidemics. It wasn't a pandemic, luckily, but we can learn a lot about it and about how these pandemics occur and how these viruses spread. So click the link in the page on Unit 6. Follow along. It gives you a video on Ebola. It's pretty interesting. You can follow along, fill out the worksheet as you watch it. And then there's another link for an activity where you can basically look at different types of viruses and answer a couple questions about the Ebola virus. So hopefully that was helpful. Not as short as I expected. Apologies for that. But that is my presentation. And if you have any questions, let me know.